This is episode 4. We've got some news for you.
You're going to learn how to re-rail a 200-ton locomotive.
And we're going to teach you how to swindle stock investors.
This is Railroad Showcase. There have been railroad crooks as long as there have been railroads. We're going to take a look at 3 of the worst.
Okay, so this first one we have was in 1968, just after the Civil War, and it involved George Swepson and Milton Littlefield surrounding the Western North Carolina Railroad.
So now, one of them was a northerner and one of them was a southerner, right?
Correct. So George Swepson was a southern businessman. He involved himself in a lot of different projects all over the market, from banking to manufacturing to real estate to brokering, all kinds of stuff. Milton Littlefield, however, was a northerner, and during the Civil War, he rose through the ranks in the Union Army.
Okay, so how did these two become tied together in a railroad scam?
So they didn't meet until after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, because the South, the economy was in shambles, and there was a lot of rebuilding going on, both financially and actually from the damage of the war. Littlefield was known as a carpetbagger, someone from the North who traveled down to the South to take advantage of all that. You could make a lot of money. If you had money from the North, you could buy up land and resources in the South and either sell it or just put yourself ahead of the game and encourage the railroads to either expand their lines or continue the lines that they had planned before the Civil War. In particular, the Western North Carolina Railroad had one line that would really benefit the area, but it never got finished. So the state stepped in and said, we'll give you $6.4 million in the form of bonds to help you guys get off your feet and get that project started. There was 3,800 bonds given to them, and of those 3,800, 2,000 of them were bought by George Swepson and Milton Littlefield, which was like $4 million in bonds. This put George Swepson as the majority stockholder in the company, put him as president of the company, and then in the middle of the night, he just disappeared. He took all $4 million of the bonds, and apparently, it's unconfirmed, but it's reported that he escaped in the middle of the night in the cab of an engine that belonged to one of the banking companies that he was closely connected with. He seems to have made a clean getaway, both him and Littlefield. They were both indicted, but they were never actually convicted of that crime. This did a major hit for the railroad. The railroad got some of the money back, but it took them 3 years to recover enough to actually start back up on that construction that they originally intended.
So what ultimately happened to the two of them?
Well, it seems that Swepson just left Littlefield out to dry. In his escape, there's nothing about Littlefield making off with any of the money, and it seems that he actually lived the remainder of his life in poverty, even being jailed once for not paying a hotel bill, whereas Swepson, on the other hand, lived the rest of his life in pretty much comfort. And in Raleigh, there's a large monument above where he's buried, so he seems to have made a clean getaway.
So much for honor among thieves.
All right, so the second scam that we're going to talk about is one that most people have heard of, the credit Mobilier scam. This occurred during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. So, during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, there was very little incentive for the railroads to actually build across all that deserted wasteland that hadn't been developed. There's nothing for them there. So the government gave them incentive, a lot of cash for financing, as well as a ton of land per mile that they built that was based off of how many miles each railroad built. With the government stepping in to encourage them, that was where they made a lot of money. To make even more money, some of the executives of UP decided to take the opportunity and start their own scam. This involved the creation of the Credit Mobilier Company, and that was founded by the vice president of UP at the time, Thomas Durant, and one of UP's founders, George Train. Other directors and operators of the company were involved, but for the most part, it was them two that started it.
It is worth noting that over in France at the time, there was a financing concern called Credit Mobilier that was highly respected and involved in transportation around the world. However, this Credit Mobilier Company, as many Americans pronounced it, was not the same thing. They had borrowed the name to lend itself some credibility.
So, Mobilier was formed, and the officials at UP impartially, quote unquote, chose them as subcontractors to build the railroad. Of course, the thing was, the directors and operators of Mobilier were principally the same as UP. All of the profits of both companies were going to the exact same men. On top of that, Mobilier was charging UP exorbitant rates, far above cost, which was then approved by, quote unquote, UP, the same men, which was a huge conflict of interest. Then UP, adding a proper handling and management fee, sent the invoice to Congress, and that's how it had the appearance of being all above board. So they sent this high invoice to Congress, who they got to approve it by bribing 15 powerful officials, such as the current Vice President, Schuyler Colfax, Congressman Oakes Ames, and the Speaker of the House, James Blaine, to name a few. They paid them with either cash direct or by selling stocks of Mobilier at a reduced cost, which they could then resell to the public at a very large profit. In total, Congress paid out $94.6 million to the railroad. It only cost $50 million to actually build it. So they got $20 million of UP profit and $23 million of Mobilier profit. That today, that $43 million adds up to $809 million, almost $1 billion.
You know, I guess it wasn't without reason that they started calling them railroad barons.
In the end, everything did come to light in 1872. The Sun newspaper in New York wrote an expose that instigated the eventual investigation of 13 congressmen. This led to the censure of Oakes Ames and James Brooke. It ruined the reputation of many other politicians, and it nearly bankrupted Union Pacific and many of its stock investors. It seems that these guys were able to keep most, if not all, of their profit from all of this.
For some people, crime does pay.
Okay, so the third and final scam here is not as big, but it's probably the weirdest one that I've heard about railroading. So, in 1890, the Holmans Speeding Truck Company appeared, claiming that they had developed a new technology that would allow for steam engines to increase speed using the same amount of steam and, by effect, using less fuel. They had two engines run with this design, one just being lifted up and the other one specially built by Baldwin Locomotive Works. From the book Development of the Locomotive Engine, Angus Sinclair said, "They are advertising in Philadelphia papers that a company has been formed to sell this kind of locomotive, the capital stock being $10 million. They offer to sell the stock for $25 a share, the par value being $100. They make the claim that this sort of engine is destined to be the locomotive of the future." Sinclair went on to say, "My opinion, expressed in locomotive engineering, was, it is a humbug. It is sound engineering to hold that every piece added to a machine after it has reached the practical stage is a source of weakness. A triple set of wheels under a locomotive would be proposed only by one who is densely ignorant of mechanics." They ran a few trips with it, mainly to keep selling stock, which worked, unfortunately, because it seems that there was quite a few people who actually bought into this. Most of them being people with a small savings that they had set aside, and they hope that this might be the big break for them to be able to make more. So they swindled old ladies out of their savings.
That's the tragedy about these scams. I mean, we look at it now and we see, well, obviously this thing is preposterous. It won't work, and yet the people that they target are the naive, the gullible, the people who are desperately risking everything they have for the hope of something better, and then guys like this come along.
Yeah. The only silver lining to it is because of the fact that it didn't work in any way, all it did was add more wear and tear, more maintenance, and it actually hindered the efficiency of the engine because it didn't actually change the way it ran. It just made it go through more gears to do it. It caused it to use more fuel, and it derailed easier. So it ended fairly quickly, and it gave us some pretty funny pictures to look at. On Tuesday the 22nd, around 9:30 a.m., a Canadian National train carrying grain jumped the tracks near a grade crossing. 30 of the 52 cars derailed. And a fire was started by the engine and its fuel. While no deaths or injuries were reported, some people in their cars were shaken, saying that they could feel the wreck happening.
GE Transportation and WABTEC announced a merger as far back as last May, and they've been working on the details since then. It is expected to be finalized in just a few weeks. The terms of the deal have shifted in the last 8 months, and the final terms were announced last week. According to Barron's, GE gets more cash up front, which it needs. WABTEC gets a larger share of the combined company for agreeing to the change in terms. Students of railroad history will know that WABTEC used to be a part of WABCO, the Westinghouse Air Brake Company. George Westinghouse formed the company in 1869. He's the man who first came up with automatic train air. Over the years, the Westinghouse Air Brake Company was referred to as WABCO. Confusingly, when the company split in modern times, the railroad side of the company was named WABTEC, and the non-railroad portion kept the name WABCO. In more WABTEC news, Siemens just won a judgment against the company. WABTEC and Siemens have been suing each other over the last several years. The latest round will force WABTEC to pay Siemens $6.7 million in damages for using intellectual property from 8 Siemens positive train control patents.
UP has been doing track work down around Shreveport, Louisiana. KTBS Channel 3 ran a news story about residents who live next to the tracks complaining about the smell from gondolas filled with ties on a siding behind their homes. The remote broadcast had a reporter on location indicating that when the wind blew, it wasn't as bad, but when the air was still, the creosote smell permeated the surrounding area. One resident complained of respiratory problems. A professor in the neighborhood warned of genetic mutation.
These molecules insert into our DNA. They can cause mutations and they can cause changes in gene expression that lead to a variety of conditions.
As recently as 3 months ago, the CEO of Kansas City Southern had strong negative hints to imply that precision scheduled railroading, in his opinion, was a plan with a concerning focus on short-term benefits. Then, just recently on January 18th, simultaneous to the release of a lower-than-expected earnings report, Kansas City Southern announced it would be adopting elements of precision scheduled railroading. It is worth noting that during those 3 months, Union Pacific stock increased $9 billion in value simply by their announcement of the hiring of an operations officer known for precision scheduled railroading. Regarding the details of the implementation, Freightways quoted the CEO as saying, "We are very early in our thinking here."
So what do you think? Do you think KCS has really just done a 180 and had a hallelujah moment about the precision scheduling?
Well, I can't really pretend to know, but I'll tell you, if I were a CEO and I had just released some very disappointing numbers to my stock investors and everyone in the audience was all excited about precision scheduled railroading, I might be tempted to step up to the microphone and start shouting precision scheduled railroading.
Makes sense. Not everyone's on board with that, though. Matt Rose with BNSF isn't on board with that.
Well, no, but he, obviously he's outgoing, but for the last several years, he's been in a very different position because BNSF is not directly traded on the stock exchange anymore. Berkshire Hathaway is a holding company that has lots of different corporations under its umbrella, and BNSF is just one of them. There are stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, and those people need to be answered to. But Matt Rose wasn't running a railroad that had to turn around to Wall Street every single quarter and justify his numbers. So he's probably had an opportunity to look at things in kind of a longer-term perspective. And maybe that's what the whole thing boils down to, is being able, on the one hand, trying to satisfy very impatient Wall Street speculators versus long-term investment-minded shareholders. I don't know. I don't pretend to understand, but it sure does seem like a surprising change.
This week, we have 4 favorite finds. Why don't you start?
Okay, let's take a look first at the Pasadena Model Railroad Club. This favorite find is actually a university project by Ethan Bresnick, a cinematic art student at USC. He does a wonderful job of not just capturing the look and the feel of this huge club, he does an excellent job of humanizing it.
My childhood photo albums capture my love for trains. My mom would take me to the Model Railroading Club near my grandparents' home each holiday break. I've held on to this interest throughout my life. Now going to college in Los Angeles, I decided to visit our Model Railroading Club and meet the members.
It's always good to look for the human story, and this 5-minute video short hits a home run.
Goes back to 1972 in downtown Los Angeles because my job was there. They also had a news stand in the same location. Picked up a Model Railroad Craftsman magazine, went to Toys R Us, bought what we would really call toy trains. And they lasted for a while, and then I went into something better.
In junior high school is when I started with model railroading, and it's 6x6 piece of plywood. It helped me a lot of ways because then I became interested in electronics, and that led into basically what I'm doing today. My present job is with Metrorail. Cover all the lines. Different types of electronic communications. That I started off with model railroading because I work around trains. My sister says I have the dream job.
Interestingly, he has a number of other assignments posted on Vimeo as well. Most of them have 20 views or 60 or 100 views. This one that he did on model railroads, over 500 views.
So what's that saying about best laid plans, or rather, best laid rails? sometimes it doesn't always go accordingly. How do you re-rail a 200-ton engine? A couple of years ago, the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society experienced something no preservation group ever wants to go through. The 765 went on the ground when the inside rail on a curve rolled.
Yep. 1231's ready.
Ellie, try. 765 ready.
Just looking for something to stand. Okay. Now we can push it on. There we go. One more.
I really thought it was interesting how they used the extended reach forklift to pull that back truck over while re-railing.
Yeah, you use whatever tools you have at your disposal to get the job done.
Yeah. To see the full video, go to the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society's YouTube channel. They've got some great videos over there. Check them out. The link is in the show notes below.
So the next thing I want to talk about is the February issue of Trains magazine. As always, Kalmbach puts out a superb publication, and when I grow up, I want to be just like Jim Rinn. This issue has an interesting article on spike technology and a couple of great pieces on the histories of various transcontinental routes. But what I was most excited to see was the cover article by my longtime Facebook friend, Tisha Boggs. She wrote about the construction of the new bridge over the Genesee River in New York State. Her article thoroughly covers the history of the 1875 Iron Bridge, the engineering and the logistical challenges of the new construction. So in researching this article, she said that she made so many trips up to New York that she probably drove over 4,000 miles getting ready to put this article together.
That's insane.
It's a lot of work, but that's what it takes to do really good reporting. And she also said that the thing that impressed her the most was the pride that the Norfolk Southern crews and that the construction crews put into this project. I mean, just to begin with, it was an engineering feat, but they had a lot of constraints from the various different stakeholders in the project, and they had a lot of hoops that they had to jump through to get it done, and all of these people were really taking the job seriously and took a lot of pride in getting it done.
Well, with a project like this, it's earned.
Right. So, Trains Magazine February issue, it'll be on your it'll be on the newsstands somewhere near you.
You know, someone asked me if we were trying to be in competition with Trains Magazine.
Well, you know, there is nobody that's in competition with Kalmbach or White River. They are the big fish in the pond. But You know, there's actually a different way that I have of looking at that. It's all about time and attention. And so we're not in competition with anything that Kalmbach is doing. We're in competition with Netflix binge watching. We're in competition with people who want to watch a basketball game, or people who want to sit down and play a video game, or go read a book. It's just all about what do people want to spend their time doing and partaking of. And so it's just up to us to be interesting enough that people want to give a few minutes of their time to us each week.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for episode 4. Thank you for tuning in. We're glad you're here.
This is a fantastic hobby, and we're hoping you're having as much fun as we are. Thanks again for watching.
Keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.